Hey, Brian of London here again, talking about Tommy Robinson. I should talk about other stuff, but this one's really directed at Mike Doran and, of course, by extension, Gadi Taub, because they were talking about Tommy on their show Israel Update. These are all things I think I've said before, probably on streams like this that hardly anybody ever sees. Happy to go on somebody's podcast, a big show if you want. Call me, I'll tell this story. But specifically in the latest episode of Israel Update, which came out last night, which was excellent and specifically filled us all in on the goings on about the Army's Advocate General or Attorney General. Advocate General is what it technically is called. And this is the woman who leaked to the press the horrible, ridiculous, and downright blood libelous accusations about rape. Anyway, in that episode, they carry on discussing Tommy Robinson because when Tommy was here last week or the week before, Gary both interviewed him and introduced him at his giant event in a hangar in the port in Tel Aviv. And Mike Doran's point of view seems to be, and I'll, forgive me if he's basically saying he doesn't trust him because he doesn't know what he'll be like in 10 years. That the last 2 years that he's seen have been pretty good, but that he's been watching Tommy longer. So this is something I've come across a lot because I've kind of been talking to Tommy for, 12, 13, 14 years or so, back to 2009 and 10, the earliest days of the EDL. So it's worth understanding how I met Tommy and how that fits with the answer to the question, what has changed in the last 10 years? Because as many of you know, I toured Israel with Tommy. He called me and said, I want to come to Israel, and I put together a tour. That was in no way my job at the time. I hired a tour guide, someone you now know as Tal Hartouf. She was our tour guide. She didn't know who Tommy was, and she says this in the podcast that I think she did with him. When I called her and said, would you be our tour guide? She looked him up online, saw the Googles, phoned me back and said, I'm not touring Israel with a goose-stepping Nazi. So I said to her, okay, here. And I sent her I actually sent her a PDF copy of Enemy of the State, because I sent her the proof copy, the one that I had been given before it was published, to proofread it, which I did. So she read that, and then she called me back and she said, he sounds a bit different from what the BBC and the Guardian are saying. Okay, let's do it. And we did it. And we spent 7 days in the car. And it's a long story that I really should tell at some point. It would be great to go through the whole, what we did on that tour, because it was a great tour. And even now, whenever Tommy's on stage or talking about Israel or in podcasts and Israel comes up, he goes to, half a dozen things that happened on that tour, and there's more, that I wouldn't say shaped his view of Israel, but by the time he got here, and this was 2016, remember, this was post-Brexit, he arrived the day of the 2016 elections in America, and we woke up on the very first morning that he was in the country. We woke up to the news that Trump had been elected, and we in fact learned that whilst looking at an ancient boat that had been dug out of the mud on the banks of the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, which is a boat from the Jesus era 2,000 years ago, a typical fishing boat of the time, a sort of exactly what the disciples who were fishermen would have been using. We were literally sitting in like a raised seating area, looking at our phones, looking to see Trump's acceptance speech, and I think Hillary skipped and didn't even do a concession. Anyway, that was when Tommy was here. Now, his view on Jews and Israel was pretty close to being well formed, but the trip provided him with a lot of confirmations and obviously a ton of new information. He didn't really know the details, as very few people do, about 20% Arab population and so many Muslims living in Israel as Israeli Arabs, not Palestinians. He didn't understand the territories. He didn't understand Judea, Samaria, the West Bank. He hadn't seen with his own eyes. So he did all of that in 2016. Now, I came to meet him because I left the UK. I started leaving in 2007. It's complicated. I got to Israel in 2009. And when I got here, a lot of my friends, I'd been active in what I would call the counter jihad. That is, people working against jihad. I was specifically concerned about Islamic jihad taking over civilization. My views obviously have moved on a little bit more, and now the sort of combination of Islamic jihad and the left-wing threat and oligarchy, that also comes into it. And also my views on Islam, I wouldn't say they've softened, but they are much more nuanced from coming to live in Israel than they were when I was still in the UK. So I'd left the UK, and then I had all these friends still active. Not a great many, but a few. They know who they are. And they called me, or I was hearing chatter saying this EDL thing that was starting to be spoken about, and this guy, Tommy Robinson, they're not what you think. Now, I grew up in West London. I'm of an age where, when I was sort of in my formative youth, if you went to the wrong places, there would be skinheads with black boots. And if they knew you were a Jew, they would beat you up. That was the National Front, Combat 18, the political expression of which was the BNP or the National Front. I knew exactly what all of these people were. I knew their manifestos: anti-black, anti-immigrant of all stripes, anti-Indian, and especially anti-Jew, because Jews have a special place in the heart of that brand of proper far right. And their complaints about Jews running the world, banking, taking all the money, all of those complaints are what we now see with, the Tucker Carlsons and the Nick Fuentes, this whole, doing all the porn. All of those complaints were exactly the same from the BNP back in the day in the UK. And it's re-emerging here also now on what I call the true far right. But I was being told that the EDL wasn't like this. So the only way I could really explore that was they had web forums. This was largely pre-Facebook, pre-X, Twitter. Social media as it exists today didn't really exist. So people were using web forums. So I went to the web forums of the EDL, and they had, you created a username and you logged in. And I did that. At first, for a couple of weeks, I had an anonymous guest account and I just read. And then I thought, well, let's see what happens. So I logged on, gave myself the name Brian of London, which is what I've been using for about 4 years in the UK, as a pseudonymous account. I had not put my face to the account. It just had a little flag. And the flag was the flags of the Anglosphere. So it was sort of the British flag, the American flag, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, I think was in there. And then I stuck an Israel flag on it as well. So it was Anglosphere plus Israel. And that was my identity, Brian of London. And in my bio, I said I lived in Tel Aviv, that I had come from London. And I joined and I started reading what was there. And what was there was people, the primary things that went on the EDL forums in those days, to my memory, other people might remember more, but what I remember was organizing buses to go to demonstrations after they were called. That was sort of, it was like a chat room for football hooligans. That's what it was. But what was weird was that even though many of them would say Aston Villa or Man U or Liverpool or Brentford or whatever in their bios, there was no I didn't see animosity of the sort of inter-club stuff, which you would have expected amongst football fans, hooligans of that era. That wasn't there. So I join. I'm an open Jew, an Israeli living in Israel. And the other thing they're talking about is grooming. But not from the point, not from like an academic thing. They're talking about, there are literally men posting there, and it was nearly all men. There were a few women, almost all men, saying, we haven't seen our daughter for 4 days. Or the stories that you have read subsequently of people going to houses and then getting arrested trying to get their daughters back, those stories were there on the EDL forums, which have been wiped, okay? I don't think they exist in archive.org. They never made it to, they just never got, it was never a priority to preserve them, and certainly the authorities didn't want them preserved. That's what was there on the forums. Now, and then there was also technical discussions about Islam, about the Quran, about, and to quite a high level. And I met on there some people who I know to this day who are very, very literate on Islam. They've read all the books. They've read Reliance of the Traveller. I'm not talking just Quran, Hadith, Sunnah. Those are the basics. I'm talking extensive. Ask Andy Bostom's works, the works of Bat-Yaor in particular. Pamela Gellert, followed Pamela Geller's work, Robert Spencer's books. All of that stuff was being discussed on these forums. And they were discussing what had happened at last week's demonstration in Nottingham or wherever, which was always entertaining for me because, you know, I was sort of vicariously, and the stuff that was going on with police bashing them over their heads, putting Antifa next to them, bottle fights. I mean, you know, Antifa would throw cans at them. They would then empty the cans, fill them with piss, throw them back. I mean, the EDL was rough, okay? But I also knew, you know, and then I got very friendly with some of the people who were going to these. And one of them was Peter McLaughlin, who writes Manifesto, Muhammad's Quran, writes books with Tommy. And Peter, it's not giving anything away to say that he's older than me and he's a gay man with a nice gay partner. And he started going to these demos. And he started learning about Islam, and he's a very quick study, and he studies deep. And what he told me about the demos was incredible, because he was just not the kind of guy to go to these demos, but yet he went, felt safe, felt welcome, and had a good time at most of them. This was not what the media were portraying. And at the top of it all, and I wrote a little note, Mike said, I've known a lot of guys like Tommy Robinson, which is a curious comment because Mike doesn't know Tommy Robinson. He only knows videos, press reports, and stuff like this. And I can honestly say I have not known a lot of guys like Tommy Robinson. In fact, he's astonishingly unique. I'm not going to sort of sing his praises to high heaven, but he's brighter than you think, much, much brighter than you think, and driven in a way I can't comprehend, because I can't comprehend going to prison for, I can't comprehend going to prison. I can't then comprehend going to prison for non-crimes, and I can't comprehend going to prison for non-crimes that support your ideology to that degree. And yet he's done it multiple times, and he's faced it each time. He's exceptional, which is why the authorities in the UK are terrified of him. They really are. So when Mike says he's known a lot of guys, you don't. And then the other thing is he likes what he said in the last couple of years. Now, I've been talking to him for plus 10 years. Is Tommy a different person from the one I first met when he came to Israel in 2016? I mean, I'd been speaking to him before, but that was actually my first in-person meeting with him. Is he different? Yes, he's calmer. When he's working out and doing exercise and stuff, that has a very beneficial effect on his psyche. But he is also massively full of energy when he needs to be and when he's working. and he has learned the skills of journalism very, very well. Now, he didn't have that in 2016. It was still kind of, I think it was prior to Rebel, and he didn't come here with a team that could film properly. There was some filming, but it was sort of secondary. Now he's a professional. He's really a very good professional. I would call him an opinionated journalist. He doesn't hide that he has an opinion, but then most journalists today don't. The ones who are working for the BBC and the Guardian pretend that they're not opinionated journalists, but they bloody are. So at least Tommy is honest about the opinionated nature of his journalism. Is he a different person in the way he feels about Israel and Jews? Yes. He has learned much more, and October the 7th, especially, just like most of us Israelis, has made him a much firmer supporter of Israel and Jews. That's the change. I mean, he went from I would put him as a 9.5 before, and he's an 11 now. If we're going by Spinal Tap scales, he's an 11, and it's just not financial. I can assure you that. I mean, I know it is financially massively damaging to support Israel at the moment. Okay, the money is all flowing from Qatar and from other sources. The money, if you want to know what the position is that the money buys, it's Tucker Carlson's position. That's the position the money wants you to take. Now, Mike also brought up something at the Azerbaijan embassy in London. I don't even remember that, and that's odd for me because I remember most stuff connected with Tommy. But I'll say this. Yes, it's possible that the view of Islam is that Islam versus everyone else is a dominant feature. And therefore, he's going to be naturally predisposed, as many of us are, to look very, very, very nervously at anything done by an Islamic country versus a non-Islamic and wonder what's going on here. Now, I haven't studied Azerbaijan, Armenia to enough of a degree, and I accept, Mike, your contention that it's going to be absolutely loaded up with Iranian and Russian propaganda. And this brings into the other part which Tommy has faced all his life, which is that the mainstream media are just not to be trusted on almost any of this. We cannot trust mainstream media views of Israel. That's why I'm listening to Israel Update with Gary Taub and Mike Doran, because there's nothing I can learn from the BBC about Israel. Zero. Efes. Zilch. And if Tommy takes a position, a bad position, on one current event, that is absolutely normal. You wouldn't expect anyone to get every call absolutely right. I think you're too pro-Turkey. I'm very, very much more nervous of Turkey than you seem to be, Mike. But again, I'm not a subject matter expert on Turkey and haven't spent vast amounts of time on it as you have. So I don't know. Now, you then said there are two reasons why he might have led something outside the Azerbaijan embassy. And you said one would be just getting it wrong and believing Iranian and Russian propaganda. That's the one I would go with. Then you said he was paid to do it. Okay, nobody's ever paid him to do a demo. In fact, any demo, I don't remember the Azerbaijan one. I don't know what he organized, if he organized anything other than just turn up. But the ones in London are costing a freaking fortune. And behind the scenes, there is a massive scramble to pay for these things. People do not underestimate what it costs to have 4 giant screens and sound systems all the way down Whitehall. And then, of course, it's still not big enough because essentially that last thing in London, it should have been held in Hyde Park. Those are massive costs, and he has to raise the money to do that. He's not being paid in any significant way to do this. Like the trip here, I know that the flights were covered. The hotel for the first half of the trip was paid for by I think the state of Israel, I don't really know the full details, buses and tours, and these were covered, but not to a gigantic degree. That there's just no money in this. And the state of Israel is crap. Whatever money they spend doesn't go to the right places. Now I'm going to circle back. You said at the end, you said you don't want to be associated with him and you're not sure what he'll be like, but you like the current Tommy Robinson. Okay, I can accept that. And I want to tell you what happened once I had joined these EDL forums. I kept almost provoking. I kept saying stuff, having this debates about the King David Hotel bombing. I kept saying stuff to see what the reaction would be, not to wind people up, but I just wanted to see. And what I found was that if and when someone joined with a classic far right, anti-black, anti-Hindu, anti-brown, anti-Afro-Caribbean, anti-Jewish, if someone joined with those views and started pushing them, they got banned and I didn't. It was as simple as that. It was the debate. We could debate whether Begin and his crowd should have blown up the King David Hotel, and people were willing to listen. My views back then probably I didn't know enough to argue properly. I would be better at it today. But I was the one that was kept, and these sort of real far right elements and the race-based nonsense, that was kicked off. And I became friendly with some of the people who were administrating. I started helping out behind the scenes with some document writing. I helped write I think they called the mission statement or the charter, went through various names. I stuck in a bit about the EDL was a human rights organization with the human right to protest. I wrote a speech that was delivered eventually by Kevin Carroll, Tommy's cousin, outside the Israeli embassy. So I wrote that speech. Now, had Tommy been there, he wasn't there for some reason. Tommy would never have delivered my speech because Tommy never delivers anybody else's speeches. But Kevin pretty much read what I wrote. So blame me. Now, the other thing that happened at the time, this probably was mid 2010 when they were starting to rise and have demos. By back channels, I contacted the Board of Deputies and the Community Security Trust, the CST in the UK, the establishment Jews, the real proper representatives of the British Jewish community, Lord this and Sir that. And I said to them, the EDL is not your problem. The EDL are not going to talk about Jews. They don't care about Jews because, as Tommy has said subsequently, he doesn't know anything about Jews, or didn't really know anything about Jews, because Jews made no impact negatively on his life whatsoever. But everywhere he looked, there seemed to be good Jews. And this is something that Tommy has always seen. It's like, yeah, Jews are overrepresented on the left, but you know what? We're also overrepresented on the right. We are just making a difference over and above our station in almost every field of human endeavor, as I always say, except professional golf, where we suck, and genocide. We can't do genocide. We're really bad at that, and professional golf, really bad. A lot of other fields of human endeavor, arts, sciences, we excel. We do. Sorry. So I said to the Board of Deputies, the EDL is not your issue. You don't have to support them. Don't rah the EDL. Just be quiet. But no, it's all about Islamophobia. We have to kumbaya with our Muslim friends, and we have to denounce the EDL, and when I sent this letter to them, what they actually sent me back was a copy of an article condemning the EDL with the same old bullshit. It was new bullshit back then, from Searchlight magazine. And I think it would have actually been written by Nick Lowles, who became the head of this thing called Hope Not Hate, which is an ultra-Marxist, Fabian Society, communist organization basically established with government connivance. Of course, it's a charity, it has a charitable side, which means government actually give it money, because that's what a charity, if a charity gets money from someone else, they don't pay the taxes, and the taxes go to the charity. It's like, it's government supported. And that was the tool of the fascist state to try and destroy the EDL. That's what it was. And the Jews, the Jewish organizations, the official Jews, were sending me back a communist newspaper to tell me I was wrong in my impression of the EDL and Tommy. And the other thing that was absolutely apparent back then, especially when Tommy went to prison for the first time, which was, I think it was just before that I first spoke to him on the phone. Then what happened was I knew the previous year he had tried to go to Manhattan for Pamela Geller's 9/11 mosque demonstration. I need coffee for this. And he got turned back. I think he got to America, denied entry, sent home. Following year, I thought he's not dumb enough to try again. Anyway, he goes quiet for a couple of days, and then I see a picture, and he's standing there with Robert Spencer, Kevin Carroll, his cousin, and Pamela Geller, all four of them in New York, I think. And that, I think, was where he was wearing either a Fire Department of New York or a Police Department of New York t-shirt. So he's standing, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, he's convicted felon, he's standing in New York, there's no way this happened. How could this happen? But it did. And the story subsequently emerged that he borrowed a passport, flew to JFK, got sort of to passport control and just legged it through. Anyway, he was there for a week, flew home. Americans didn't want to press any charges. And a week or two later, armed police, of course, it's always armed police for Tommy, come and arrest him in the middle of the night. And he served time in prison. And when he went to prison, despite the efforts of some of the people who were sort of senior in the EDL, they couldn't hold it together. Without his presence, and his presence was always without his presence, the EDL went bad, always. And I think it survived that time in prison, and it sort of came back, but it was mortally wounded. And the next time he went to prison, which was for when he pled guilty on the ridiculous mortgage fraud case, which was never a case, and it was just purely find me the man, I'll show you the crime. When he went to prison for that was when he did the deal with Quilliam to support his family while he was inside and to come out of the EDL. And the EDL just disintegrated really without his presence. Because back to what you said, Mike, you know a lot of guys like Tommy. Well, you don't. You actually don't. Tommy is an extremely rare thing. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be a political leader extraordinaire. I don't think that's what he desires. But he is not normal. He is extra normal. And in terms of whether he will always ideologically align with me on everything, of course he won't. On the big stuff, on Israel, defense, standing up against jihad, rolling back jihad, keeping a country that is Jewish and keeping a Jewish Israel for Jews, he's 100%. I don't see him changing on that at all. And I see him, by extension, extending that kind of pluralist thinking of Britain and the home nations in particular choosing their own identities and saying to immigrants, not no immigrants, or not immigrants go out, but this is the identity of Britain. This is what Britishness is. This is what Englishness is. You must respect that. To come to England and to try and convert it into an Islamic country, that isn't going to work. And that's, as far as I can see, Islam is the only invading force in the UK that is trying to turn the country completely around to their nature, to submit, to make everyone else submit to the rules of Islam. Tommy is not going to drastically change, I believe, his views on that form and the expression, that the positive expression of nationalism in a European setting. So, don't know if you'll watch all of that, Mike. It's a pleasure if you do. I'd be honored. Happy to talk about this on anybody else's podcasts or face questions, but For now, that's almost half an hour. That's way too much. I'm Brian of London. I'm in Tel Aviv, as I have been for 17 years, 16 years. And I love it here. And I love being Israeli and I love being Jewish. Bye bye.